From the studios of Tucson Business Radio X, recorded in the Stewart Title corporate offices on Broadway, you are now listening to The Mark Bishop Show. And now here's your host, Mark Bishop.
And welcome to another Mark Bishop Show. You know, Theodore Roosevelt notably said, "This country will not be a good place for any of us to live unless we make it a good place for all of us to live in." Yes, it depends on us to make choices that create happy, safe, and healthy environments for all of us to live in. But sometimes we are faced with unforeseen events that are out of our control. We get flooding, earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions, and of course, devastating bushfires like my homeland of Australia is fighting. Now, my special guest is Phil Kennedy. Phil is the owner and CEO of Aussie World Travel. That's AussieWorldTravel.com. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to be on air with you, talking with another Aussie.
Yeah, mate. Australia, well, we've been ravaged by the worst wildfires seen in decades. I mean, it's the worst I've ever seen. We grow up with bushfires, don't we? But never to this extent.
We do, Mark, and we're certainly very grateful for all the messages of support for Australia during this bushfire crisis, the worst that I believe the country has ever seen. Following those recent bushfires impacted some parts of the country. As these regions begin the road to recovery, it's important to note, Mark, that the vast majority of Australia remains unaffected and ready to welcome your listeners, Mark.
Well, dozens of lives have been lost, thousands of homes have been destroyed, and over 500,000, or I should say billion, animals have been killed. We're seeing that here specifically on television and so on in the news, and it's been getting coverage. And of course, you see the raging bushfires, but you see a lot of very heartstrings, pictures of the roos and the koala bears and other animals burnt, and even coming out of the fires, coming to humans on the road to get water or to get help. And consequently, a lot of Americans think, well, gee, Australia's gone, And this is really what you'd like to share, that, hey, we're a hell of a big country, I know it's been bad, but guess what? We've still got a lot to show you, Yanks.
Mark, you summed it up well, my friend. And yes, Australia takes up about 95% of mainland USA, as you well know. Unfortunately, the images and sensationalist media headlines around America on the Australian bushfires have pretty well painted a picture that Australia is on fire. Well, Mark, that's like saying America is on fire.
Right.
And whilst we can't play down the devastation of the communities affected and the wildlife as well. Really, the fires have impacted about 5% of Australia. And tragically, some of these areas are key wildlife corridors. And so the images you see on social media and on cable, Mark, are certainly heartbreaking. But I want to say to you, yes, Australia is open for business, and we would certainly like people to look at the images of the turquoise waters and the beautiful bushland and the gorgeous native wildlife that we have around the country.
It is beautiful, and there's no doubt about it. And what was I going to say? I just want to correct something. Well, it's not really a correction. It's more of a discussion point. But, as Australians growing up, we always referred to our dear friends, the Americans, as Yanks. But, of course, until you live here, which I have done now for a considerable amount of time, you really find out what a Yank is. And, unless you're the East Coast, and no doubt you've found this out too, because you travel all over America, But east of the Mason-Dixon line, yeah, you could be a Yank. The rest of it are just good Americans and very good friends of Australia. I mean, we've spilled a lot of blood on many sands together, haven't we, as allies?
Oh, indeed we have, Mark. Yes. And, you've just reminded me of some tatting that my mother made during the Second World War when Australia was under attack from the north. And she had on this tatting that she kept in a glory box. The Australians and Yanks are here. And she actually pulled that out of her glory box when Golden, who is a Missouri girl, and I got married, and she gave it to us, and we had that proudly sitting on our lounge, of course. And
right,
yeah, and
right.
You're right.
Speaking of Goldie, your darling out of Missouri, your bride, how's she doing these days?
She's doing exceptionally well. Thank you for asking, Mark.
That's good. Give her my love, won't you?
I will indeed.
Okay. Now, I do want to, at this particular point, I'd like to give my thanks publicly to the efforts of the American fighters that went over to help, just like we did here in the States, and my sincere condolences to the 3 airmen who lost their lives trying to put out the fires. That was a pretty sad state of affairs, mate.
Oh, Mark, the loss of life is always tragic in those circumstances. And I just want to say that, I think there are, as well as the 3 U.S. Folks that have lost their lives, there were also several volunteer firefighters also in Australia that lost their lives tragically, protecting homes and, wildlife and so forth.
Yeah, well, we Aussies, we're a resilient lot in times of desperation, disaster, and destruction, but we are very grateful to not only Americans but others from all over the globe that have donated for the support and relief of both human victims as with our animal kingdom too. Now, listeners, Phil Kennedy, he's the CEO and owner of a very successful United States-based Down Under Bound Travel. It's an organization where he takes you on extraordinary vacations throughout Australia, my beautiful country, New Zealand, the South Pacific Islands, which I've lived in and loved as well, Africa, I've never been to as yet, Asia, a fair bit of that I've been over. Just how hard have the fires hit travel to Oz, Phil?
Oh, look, Mark, to be totally honest, of course, it has impacted our American friends travelling down to Australia particularly. Because unfortunately the images that have been shot across the cable TVs and so forth,
well, just generic media.
People get a little scared.
Yeah, I don't blame them a little. I mean, I'd be scared. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. The coronavirus, cruise ships held in port, all sorts of things going on. But Americans love going to Australia. We get enormous visitors, not just Americans, all over the world, right? Well, do you know the latest stats at all, before any holdups?
Oh, I do not, but year after year, Mark, inbound tourism has been breaking records. And, Australia, certainly for many years has been the flavour of the month. And it is, the local Aussies, a little bit like you and me, Mark, that, people love to rub shoulders with and have a beer and, in the local pubs and, and explore the wildlife and take in the gorgeous scenery, whether it be, cities or out in the bush and the Great Barrier Reef, Mark. It's a beautiful country.
Well, there's a lot to see. There's a lot to see, Phil, and I'm going to touch on this because I learned flying back and forward a couple of times over the years, on and off for 16 years. I've lived here permanently now, of course. My wife is American, and at the end of the day, but I live in the desert. I live in Tucson, Arizona. That's a beautiful little city, I can tell you. 2.5 hours south of Phoenix, so that's the closest there. But I do miss my oceans. I do miss my walks along the beach, if anything else. So, if California just drop off, it'd be fine. You know what I mean?
That's right, mate. And, likewise, as you know, we're just up the beaten track there on Interstate 10. We live in the beautiful city of Surprise here in Arizona, and whilst we love it, yes, I too miss my homeland, and brought up on the beach basically as a lifesaver, and played many of our state sports, and I will be actually flying back on the 15th of this month for a few weeks just to check up on tourism colleagues and family and friends, Mark. So
that'll be good.
I'll take your best wishes.
Well, I was going to say, you lucky thing, you get a chance to go back and visit all the time, taking people. I actually sat down last year, talked to some boys in the golf club, and, everybody wants to go. I could say honestly that 9 out of 10 Americans I've met want to go to Australia, but they all think it's too far. So I give them this story, Phil, and I don't know if you'd back me on it, but this is what I say. Look, you do a full day of work or packing or whatever you want to do. Then you get to LAX at about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, read a book. You go on the plane at 11 p.m. It's the night flight, right? Particularly with Qantas. And then you enjoy the takeoff and you sit back. Next minute they're serving you a beautiful meal. And then you can have half a dozen bottles of gorgeous Australian red or white. Then you can watch half a dozen movies that haven't even been released yet into the darn theaters. You know what? I think I've got about 3 movies down and 3 bottles of red, and next minute they're tapping me on the shoulder. We're flying over Sydney Harbour. Over the bridge.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's
or
right.
Melbourne, or Melbourne, being a Mexican.
Yeah, they're tapping you on the shoulder, Mark, to have breakfast before you land, mate.
That's it. It's all included. It's all included. So what I'm getting at is, listeners, is that it's not a long way when you do that. I mean, it's just like having another go to bed. Yes, you're a little tired, but you know what? When you do wake up and you do get into Sydney or Melbourne on your first day, you don't have that jet lag. And you don't have it because you didn't take the morning flight. You took the evening flight and so on. But that's what I found, Phil. I don't know about you, but that's what I found anyway. So you're taking people back. Just before we go, I want to touch on some areas because people only think, here's the other thing. There's more to Australia than Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and the Barrier Reef. There's the Outback and beautiful dances with our Aborigine friends. And out on the Bungle Bungles, and there's Darwin. I mean, you cover everywhere, don't you, virtually?
Oh, yes, indeed I do, yeah. Mark, can I just say that last May I took a group of 23 down to Australia. We landed in Melbourne, and the first day we took them down the Great Ocean Road, mate. And I've got to tell you that their first day in Australia, they're seeing kangaroos in the wild, koalas in the wild up the trees, and and all sorts of wildlife and beautiful scenery. Lorikeets, chirping in the trees and landing on your shoulders and
it's
and
one
on
thing.
your head, and
it's amazing. The amount of bird life in Australia is absolutely amazing. My wife couldn't get over. I took her to different sanctuaries, bird sanctuaries, and the colors and the different squeeching and the talking and God knows what. Absolutely amazing. We're very fortunate as a country like that to be able to have those beautiful coloured birds. So to be able to see all of that in the wild, I mean, I remember when I first took my wife and son back to Australia, they were on a bus, and when they got off the bus, there was this beautiful roo waiting to greet them. You should have seen his face. The eyes lit up. Oh, my God, I tell you what. So it is a wonderful experience. Yeah. And the outback.
It is.
And also mixing with the Aussies, going into the pubs and, like you, listening to you, what we call Swine. Australian Swine is real down-to-earth, fair income digger.
So I said, it's fair income, mate, to someone the other day, and they looked at me and said, fair income? What on earth does that mean? No, I had to explain, Mark, that it meant Richie Didge.
Yeah, that's what I had the same experience yesterday. I got to tell you. I said, that's fit, mate, I'm fair income. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm Richie Didge. I still don't get it.
Yeah.
I said, I'm honest. I'm telling you the truth. It's going to happen. I'm for real.
That's
Well, I tell you what.
Somebody said to me some time back, Mark, do people really say g'day, mate? In Australia. And I said, yeah, of course they do, because we don't always remember their name.
Well, that's it.
It's g'day, mate,
That's exactly it. Well, it's a good way to do it, too. Yeah. G'day, mate. How you doing?
Absolutely.
Another favourite place of mine, Sydney per se. I mean, look, Sydney's the harbour. It's a beautiful harbour, one of the best harbours in the world. Beautiful ferries and boats, and I was actually there. I was working in television at the time, and we covered the tall ships that came in. Do you remember that?
I do. We call Sydney the iconic city. Yeah.
Okay, there it is. But
with
it's
the
beautiful.
Opera House and the bridge and the harbour. You're right. It is the most beautiful harbour
it's
in
stunning,
the world, mate.
and I didn't do the bridge. I haven't got the guts to do that, but my wife and son did. I tell you, man, it was one of the windiest days ever in Sydney. And they're standing up there on the top of that bridge looking at the harbour exit, our entrance and exit, and the Opera House and Garden Island, the Naval Dockyard. I tell you what, it's a beautiful view. They showed me the photographs later, but anyway. All right. Now, look, Phil, I want to talk about your choreographing extraordinary memories. Listeners, you can write to Phil if you want his email. Just wait till you get a pen. Nothing's worse. You're driving or you're doing something and you really want to get it down. So I'm going to give you a couple of things, but first of all, the name, because it's easier to remember as far as a website's concerned, all right? AussieWorldTravel.com. And, of course, there's the www before that. What's that? www. Right. www.AussieWorldTravel.com. Phil's email, personally, if you'd like to write to him, is Phil, Phil, at AussieWorldTravel.com. How simple is that? And you want a number too? Oh, all right. I hear some people saying, give me the darn phone number, will you? I haven't got time to write. Here it is, 623-249-7680. All right? Phil Kennedy. Lovely fella, knows Australia like the back of his hand. And I tell you what, he'll make sure you don't get bitten by a bloody redback spider on you know what? People say to me, Struth, you got, no, they don't know that one. They say, God, you got the 10 deadliest snakes in the world over there. And I say, yeah, and, I never see them. You don't go after them and hurt them. They won't come near you. It's the same thing as rattlers here, isn't it, than anything else,
Absolutely.
That's the thing. Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to get a nice photograph of you, maybe some shots of the tours, and I'm going to put them up on my site, Tucson Business Radio X, which is on the Business Radio X network, which is America's fastest growing business network, Phil. So it's been an honor to have you.
Thank you, Mark, and that's good to talk to someone that speaks the language, mate.
There we go.
Worries. Thank you.
Have a safe trip next time, and give Oz a big hug and a kiss for me, okay?
You betcha, mate.
All right.
Thank you.